Hi, Robert.
You're on.
All right, so we're back for another riff, and we thought we'd go back to the topic we've talked about on and off over the months, which is crypto and blockchain, and really try to do the basics. You know, what is it and how it works and so on. And maybe the first question, I still have. I go hot and cold with crypto and blockchain, but that's, I think, mainly because I just don't have a full understanding of it. What is it good for?
It's good for gambling. We've definitely,
No question about that.
Yeah, there's one thing we know, it's good for gambling.
As we speak, Bitcoin is back up to 24,000. So somebody's making
Exactly.
money.
And it's a much better game than you find in most places in Las Vegas. The house takes some, but not a lot. But that's not strictly speaking true, because over time there are more and more Bitcoins being minted in order to compensate miners. And so the real drag is the fact that you have to pay for the operation of the blockchain.
Mm-hmm.
And in theory, that the blockchain is incredibly efficient. And in practice, it's incredibly efficient in some ways, and it's incredibly costly in others. You know, I've seen numbers that suggest that crypto is accounting for 1% of global electricity use.
Yeah.
And that's for gambling. So, 1% of global electricity use is a really big number. And so maybe it's actually more expensive than Vegas. I don't know.
So is that true of all cryptos, or just a Bitcoin? Is mining a feature of every blockchain?
Yes, and not totally yes. So, the original idea behind Bitcoin was based on providing security in what looks like a massively unsecure environment. Just there you have a accessible, distributed, essentially ledger of what has happened. And it's like Wikipedia. People go into Wikipedia and they change things, and other people have to change it back, and you never quite know if it's right. And that works pretty well for Wikipedia, but 99% right doesn't work well in financial services.
Yep.
And so it was designed in a way to make it very difficult to falsify the ledger. It's almost as if you wanted to go in and mess around with Wikipedia, you would have to pay a large amount of money. And then, of course, someone would change your entry back and fix it. I know this because my oldest daughter used to change entries for you at ARI and talk about the fact that you work with me, and someone within 30 minutes at ARI would go and
switch it back.
Yeah. So, and she just did that because she was a teenager and fooling around, but it would have never happened if it had cost her $1,000 every time she wanted to do that. And the way that Bitcoin is structured, it's kind of like that. If you want to mess around with the blockchain, in theory you could, but it would be very expensive. It would be expensive to do it. It would be expensive to maintain it, and it would be costly implicitly, because if you're involved in Bitcoin, you have some interest in Bitcoin being successful. And the worst thing for Bitcoin success would be if the blockchain were compromised. So that model really works. It also is a little cumbersome. The cryptography is complex. That's a good thing. The mining is based on competition, which is also a good thing, although it does lead to literally thousands of duplicate calculations happening simultaneously. So if everyone's racing to mine the next block and get the reward of Bitcoins, then you have a lot of people who get 99% of the way there, 95% of the way, or 90% of the way there when someone else actually solves it. Mm-hmm. And those resources are wasted. There's always this kind of waste in competition, and to the extent that competition successfully advances your goals, it's usually definitely worthwhile. And in this case, that's the open question. So people are continuously looking at options for other types of blockchains that would be as secure and as robust as Bitcoin, but would be more efficient. So it wouldn't take 1% of electricity use, and it wouldn't, have a practical speed limit of, I think I hear numbers like 7 transactions per second, which, is, I don't know how many Visa transactions per second there are in December.
Millions of billions percent. I mean, it's the numbers are astounding, but there is this other layer on top of Bitcoin where you can't transact at a much faster speed. So
Yes.
there's the supposedly solutions, but they must be costly as well. Otherwise, they would be ubiquitous.
Well, they're all uncertain, right? Bitcoin is the one proven model. And then when you start adding things to it, so that you could do a lot of stuff in a less expensive way, and then maybe batch it on onto the core Bitcoin blockchain, then you introduce other potential weaknesses. And the primary one is security. I mean, we've seen this over and over. When you have a bridge between 2 blockchains, that is a potential security weakness, and we see hundreds of millions of dollars worth of crypto being stolen on an ongoing basis across these bridges. So there's always a trade-off. One of the other things that people have sort of coalesced around is, instead of Bitcoin's approach, which is called proof of work, to have proof of stake, where you only have one party doing the calculations. So you reduce the amount of computational effort, the electricity draw, by 3 or 4 orders of magnitude, because someone is assigned randomly to do the calculation. And the way you get assigned is you basically put up a bond. They call it a stake. So if you wanted to be the Yaron and you wanted to be able to mine on the Yaron Brook blockchain, you'd have to put up a bunch of Yaron coins, and those would have to be in some sort of account, basically like a bond. They would be available so that you are clearly invested in the success of the blockchain, because you have this huge investment in it. You're holding all of these coins. Ethereum is working on this, and the idea is, if you put up 1,000 Ether, then you're probably not going to screw around and mess up the Ethereum blockchain, because your Ether might go to 0. And then you assign the calculation along with the reward to people randomly, but based on the size of their stake. So if you had 10,000 Ether in your stake account, and I only had 1,000, you'd be something like 10 times more likely to be assigned that. And so essentially, you're being paid interest on your stake along with for your calculations, but you can do the calculations in a more efficient, less energy intensive way.
So Bitcoin has been talked about as for a long time, since the beginning, really. I think Satoshi's manifesto presented it as an alternative to fiat currencies, as money, really, Bitcoin as money. But most of these other blockchains are not presenting themselves as the ultimate solution for money. So what are they for? So kind of that's how they work. And that's kind of the cost and the energy cost. Although I did read an article somewhere, somebody posted this, that if you look at, and this is again from a Bitcoin money perspective, if you look at the electricity cost of money, right, of regular money, and you compare them, the electricity of an ATM, the electricity of shuffling large quantities of cash around, the money system as it exists today consumes more electricity than Bitcoin mining does. And that's probably true, but I don't think either one of us actually thinks Bitcoin is going to be money, certainly not anytime in the next few decades. So that comparison is kind of irrelevant. So putting aside the use as money, okay, what else can we do with this, and how can the benefit that is resulted from this other stuff that we do with it justify these costs and the energy and the thought that is being put into all this? Is there real value here?
Well, we'll see. That's the beauty of these kind of things, is we can speculate, but we'll actually find out. And it won't be what people think it is today, including us. It won't be what the original Bitcoin manifesto was pointing at, Bitcoin will have to evolve a lot if it's going to be even relevant in 20 years. That's just the way the world is. If you want to stay relevant, you have to evolve and improve and continue to add value in excess of what alternatives might add. But all of crypto is sort of this massive experiment in how to lower frictions, how to lower what we would call transaction costs. Life is full of transaction costs. And if you can make people's interactions run more smoothly and efficiently, you're really creating value, because then people can collaborate, they can cooperate, they can specialize way more than they could in the first place. So that was the whole point of currency in the first place. Whether it's gold or seashells, it doesn't really matter. When you have a currency, it represents essentially human effort. Yep. And it really streamlines what would have otherwise been barter. It can make both barter in the moment more effective, and it can move things around in time. So it helps you start investing to create more wealth rather than just creating wealth by exchanging in the moment. And all of the real value I can see in crypto follows that pattern. Even if Bitcoin were to become a global currency, at the level of the current version, at the level of electricity use and the limits on how many transactions can happen at any given moment, it doesn't seem like it adds any value compared to what we already have. But that doesn't mean that Bitcoin or some other crypto couldn't on its own. And this is already happening. I mean, in particular, if you look at areas where there are high frictions, and it's particularly sending money to people in other countries and sending money to people who are not part of the formal banking system. It gets pretty expensive. If I want to send you money, I can do it basically for free. Actually, I can do it literally for free.
Well, up to a certain amount, as we've discovered over the years, not banks, the regulations create all kinds of barriers for moving money around if it's above a certain amount. But yes, if you want to send a few $100s, it's instantaneous and at a zero cost.
And that is a real value. I mean, that hasn't been the case for most of history, where getting money to someone involved sending them a paper check, which in itself was an amazing innovation. So if we think about it, anything that crypto can do to reduce the frictions of people interacting, of people collaborating, of people cooperating, that's going to be real value. That's what finance basically does, is reduce those frictions. So where's it going to be value? Well, if we didn't have any currency and we were just all doing barter, then that would be a huge value. Sure. Given that we've got a pretty effective global currency system, it's probably going to be elsewhere. So I would look elsewhere. There are those low-hanging fruits, the unbanked and the international transfers, but I would be looking at where there are much larger frictions.
So some examples of that. I mean, obviously, crypto has dedicated a lot of energy to fintech and the idea of kind of disrupting the finance industry, where there are a lot of intermediaries, where there's a lot of transaction costs, not just in terms of moving money around, but in terms of loans and distribution of capital, allocation of capital.
I think that there's certainly room for improvement in the underwriting process. Historically, loans have been done on a relationship basis, which is a high friction. If you don't know someone, then it's very hard to come up with a reasonable approach to how you're going to lend them money. And to the extent that crypto can change that and more globalize the lending process, that could be a real value. Now, I don't know exactly how that happens, because most of crypto is keeping track of things rather than actually providing the data or the information that you would need. But it's certainly possible that smart contracts are a way to connect places where there's excess capital and on a macro sense, the US, for example, has excess capital. Japan has excess capital. Germany has excess capital. Any wealthy country has excess capital, with places that have a dearth of capital in ways that are win-win.
Mhm.
And that's really hard now. If you wanted to invest in Africa right now, how would you go about doing that? It would be very costly, or it would be very risky, or both. And if crypto could solve that, that would be amazing. I don't exactly see how that is, but that's the kind of area that would be interesting. And the other one that everyone talks about is, building a new internet on the blockchain, so that it's not centralized in the way that Web 2.0 became. So instead of having all your data in a database at Facebook, all your data would be on a blockchain that you would have a lot more control over. And that could be really interesting. I don't see any evidence that people actually give a crap about privacy. But that's probably because people who do aren't on Facebook. And so people on Facebook don't care. And
I think part of being on Facebook is that you don't care, because you're willing to share stuff that often boggles my mind that people are willing to share it. So, but yeah, I mean, it strikes me that that there is this incredible opportunity, if people value privacy, to create something alternative on the blockchain, where you own your data and can decide how to use it. So right now you put your data out there and it's sold to advertisers, and you can see it, right? I'm in Google, I'm doing a search in Google, and I get an ad on Facebook relating to the search I did in Google. I mean, it's across all these platforms, and my data is just floating out there, and people know exactly what I've done, not maybe as an individual, but certainly as a searcher, or as a participant. Blockchain has the potential for you to gain control over that, although I'm sure you give up something in order to do that. And I'm not sure what the trade-offs are, but I have a sense that there is a trade-off, and that I'm not sure people in the kind of numbers that participate in Facebook are willing to engage in that trade-off.
I would be really interested to see how I will be really interested to see how that evolves, if people put the effort into going in the direction of having more personalized control of data. Because in addition to there not being any evidence that people care that much, there's also transaction costs. There are frictions.
Mhm.
In an ideal world, I would have some kind of admin that would be and virtual, most likely, but that would be making these kind of decisions for me. So I'm not ongoingly trying to decide whether I want people who sell, tropical vacations to know that I like going to the tropics, because right now I'm not interested in going to the tropics. So I don't want to be bombarded with those ads. But I also don't want to sit down every morning and say, well, what am I interested in looking at?
Well, but you might, if it was monetized, and that's the other interesting aspect of it, is if you owned your own data and you could participate in certain databases based on certain preferences and get paid for it, instead of Google getting the money for the advertising, you get at least a portion of the money for allowing your data to be used that way. And I think that's ultimately the incentive, but it is going to require it's going to require more effort. It's going to require you to think about who do you want and how much, and whether people are willing, whether it's lucrative enough to get people incentivized in mass. Because again, none of this works in small numbers, right? The whole beauty of this is it has to be hundreds of millions. I mean, I know Twitter is working on something, or the founder of Twitter was working on something. I don't know if they still are. I know there are others that are trying to work to create social media platforms on the blockchain. I think it's going to be fascinating to see if any of them take off.
And that's why I think you need AI, because otherwise having it the decisions actually be at the individual level, would be super cool. It's just, there's too much friction. It's too burdensome. Yeah. And what you would see is some sort of amalgamation into a few relatively trusted intermediaries that would essentially rebate you. I mean, when I see people write about, oh, transaction costs are so high because credit cards charge this much, but then you look at your experience, you go, yes, I'm definitely paying for the 1.85% that the merchant is being charged, but I get 1.5% back
Yeah.
as a rebate. And I don't decide, and nobody's doing bidding, and I don't have to, I just sign up with one company who says, here's the rebate I'll give you. And I expect that we would see that in advertising if we got to a point where it was actually opt-in. Is that there would be an incentive to opt in, and people would make their own decisions, but it would be across 3 or 4 or 5 different sort of offers that you get, just like with the credit card. And some people would choose to not share any data and not get any benefit from that. And some people would be like, here's it all and maximize their benefit.
So what is it about blockchain technology that makes that possible, that in a sense couldn't exist or would be much more expensive or much harder on the normal internet?
Because it's really hard to wrap your brain around this. I found it difficult when I've taught this in class. People, you could see their heads starting to explode, because you have to give up everything that you know about how these things are structured. So you think, okay, advertising. So, there's somebody, Google, who is automatically, but they're accountable for and incentivized to handle the matching of advertisers and searchers. And when you get into a blockchain environment, that intermediary, that centralized entity goes away. And what you have is an algorithm that can evolve, but is not controlled by any individual entity, that is sort of mutually owned by all of the users of that particular blockchain. And that algorithm is then, with inputs from you, is then in charge of all of the things that happen. And it's not that different than Google's AdSense, which is an algorithm that matches and allows for bidding. You could build that inside of something without any Google being involved, but it's hard to imagine how it happens. But that is really what the upside of the blockchain is that you can accomplish all of the magic that these leading companies have accomplished. And it really is amazing. But you could accomplish it in a distributed, self-organized way that doesn't involve those companies that we so strongly relate to the outcomes. So there's no Steve Jobs. There is a original, someone who got the Apple blockchain rolling, and then you end up with Apple.
So how do they get compensated? So how do they get incentivized and rewarded for actually creating the algorithms? Because the algorithms don't create themselves, at least not initially.
And that is where it'll be interesting to see where we can go, particularly given securities regulation, because the obvious way to do it is to create a cryptocurrency and that is going to be used on the blockchain, and have a chunk of that going to the people who make the biggest contributions. So Steve Jobs starts out with 1 billion Apple coins, or when Elon Musk comes in and gets involved in Tesla, he gets 1 billion Tesla coins. Now, certainly these key entrepreneurs would almost certainly, because Elon Musk made a lot more money than Steve Jobs ever did. But they would end up with less money. And I'm not sure whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, because it probably depends on the case. Certainly, we're probably going to get to outer space sooner, because Elon Musk got rich on Tesla, which is because he got rich on PayPal, which is because he got rich on his first
X.com or whatever it was. Oh, there was the
Yellow Books. It was basically Yellow Pages online. And so I don't have an idea of whether this is good or bad, but it's just a fact that you would distribute the rewards, or the benefits, the value being created on the blockchain. Almost certainly they would be distributed more widely than just be concentrated with the founders and the early investors. And so the incentive might not be as big, but I'm not sure that that when you get to that level, that incentives are really what matter. I think that having lower frictions, making it easier for people to find each other, to collaborate, to exchange ideas, to learn what other people have done, and from their mistakes and from their successes is probably much more important.
So it strikes me that both for this case and for the fintech example, AI is crucial, because AI is what, since you don't have a person deciding if a loan is a good loan or not, there has to be some mechanism to make those kind of decisions, and that some kind of automated mechanism has to exist to make decisions.
Well, most of the platforms I'm aware of are opt-in, right? So a loan happens if you decide to lend me money.
Mm-hmm.
And what the blockchain does is it handles all of the details. But yeah, if you really want that to be big, then you need to have some access to the data that's required, as well as algorithms that will help you make that decision. If you're just flying by the seat of your pants, it's probably not going to go well. But if there's a sophisticated, evolving algorithm that it really gives you an accurate picture of the profile of the loan, or is reliable to price the loan appropriately, so that if you're looking to make 12%, you're going to be taking a pretty precise level of risk, because it's a high return, versus someone who's willing to take 6% and if you can get that automated, then you have a huge win. And we're seeing more and more of that, not on the blockchain, but in financial services themselves. I mean, at this point, I would argue that algorithmic lending for fairly homogeneous loans, things like home mortgages for sure, is better. It does a better job than the traditional banking approach of talking to the customer and getting a sense of their character, and the things that bankers were doing 50 and 100 years ago. They have value, but large data analysis has even more value.
Yeah. And it seems like that's growing and become more dominant over time. Do we know of any successful fintech that's based on a blockchain, that is sitting on a blockchain?
Well, I mean, you could definitely argue Bitcoin is successful, but no.
Not clear that it's fintech, though. Yeah.
It is yet to be proven as the way of the future, and it's probably because if you centralize the blockchain, people are talking about moving things on the blockchain within JP Morgan, or with a dollar coin out of the Fed. If it's a centralized blockchain, it's like an oxymoron. And as long as you have an institution involved, you cannot expect to see the full embrace of decentralization. I mean, Google has no interest, and shouldn't have an interest in killing off their business model by giving everyone control of their own data and the tools that they need in order to monetize their attention online.
All right, so I'm sure there's a lot more to talk about in terms of the uses of crypto and the blockchain, but we'll do that next time or the time after that. We'll catch up on this topic. Thanks, Robert.
Thanks, Yaron. Good to see you.
See you next week.